There we go. There's my melodious tones. We're back. We got another chill stream today. We'll give it a few minutes and start once people file in. But what we're going to do today is we're going to go through some of my old clips and do a little bit of a watch party. We almost, as you can see from the screen here, we almost did a Amazing Digital Circus watch party today, but I decided against it last minute. Well, I say I decided against it last minute, but I never really decided in the first place. I left it open and then made the final decision last minute. It was a possibility. But I did enjoy it. I've never really talked about the Amazing Digital Circus on stream, or even on recorded video, but I've talked a lot about it on X. And some of my takes with it. The TLDR of my takes is I think Gooseworx is a creative visionary. I think he's very good at what he does, but he needs to escape. He needs to escape the trappings of millennial writing. But also, from my take, and I'll go into this, I'll actually plan on making a full video about it, but it seems to me like Gooseworx has a very narrow worldview. Which, the irony, of course, that any lefty who hears me say that is going to say, you're the one with a narrow worldview, you're the bigot, because you don't accept his transgender identity. Yeah, well, from my point of view... From my point of view, the Jedi are evil. Yeah, from my point of view, Gooseworx is a very narrow perspective, because it's a very interesting sort of meta phenomenon where the things that he was trying to insinuate, most of the audience didn't pick up on. And the reason most audiences didn't pick up on the insinuation that Jax was a closeted troon, that he was a closeted transgender, is because the way that his transgenderism is presented is it's very clearly presented as a coping mechanism, to be blunt. It's very clearly presented as a coping mechanism. And that's something that a lot of people don't really get. Particularly on the left. And this is why I say it's a very narrow worldview kind of problem. I talk about this with Naoto. How people who say that Naoto's story has nothing to do with transgenderism are, I don't know what they're smoking. The girl wanted to become a boy. Physically, surgically. And people say, well, it's just because she didn't feel like she was accepted in the workplace. It was about workplace discrimination. And I'm like, yeah, they're related. And the same thing is true of Jax's character. Gooseworx never outright says in the show that Jax is trans, but what he does is he presents a scenario where a person could feasibly develop gender dysphoria. He doesn't have a good relationship with his dad. That's strike number one. Strike number two is that his mother mistreats him because he's a man. She mistreats him because he's a man, because either she fails to live up to his expectations, which is the expectations she had of her ex-husband, or because she reminds him of her ex-husband because he's a man. Those are the circumstances. And so from Goose's eyes, he's saying like, oh, yeah, I'm saying that this character is transgender. But from the perspective of literally anybody else, that's just... it's trauma, you know? It's a problem. It's a problem, but it's very clearly the disconnect, and it's a very interesting disconnect to me, because it disconnects with left-wingers a little bit, especially it disconnects with normie left-wingers. I think that's the best way to put it. It disconnects with normie left-wingers because normie left-wingers see transgenderism as being innate, as an innate quality that cannot be in any way distracted from. Whereas any ordinary person would say that, no, it's something that develops in response to trauma. And Gooseworx tries to have it both ways, which is really interesting. Doesn't the IRL Jax have long hair? I wonder if Gooseworx would apply. No. He has kind of long hair. I mean, he looks kind of gay. He looks kind of gay. He's emo. He's emo, but that's it. The only implication you get is that he went to, he was a regular at Zubal's gay bar. But he was also going by his same name. He was going by Leroy. He didn't change his name or anything, so you could read that to read that he's in some way possibly gender fluid or non-binary, but that's it. Oh my goodness! Catacombs! Welcome! I hope you guys had fun. I heard about the Viking, the Viking campaign that you're planning. I'm looking forward to that. That sounds really cool. I've got an idea for a Viking campaign myself, so I'm eager to see what you guys come up with. Yeah, but welcome. We were just chatting about Amazing Digital Circus finale reactions, and then we're going to look over some very old clips from the beginning of the channel for my debut anniversary. I was looking for ideas for a potential Viking campaign. Right now we're just playing Valheim. No, that's fun. Happy anniversary. Thank you. Yes, I debuted as West of Lourdes. It was a re-debut. I just looked at the date, actually. It was June 13th of last year. So he kind of passed me by, but I've been very busy lately. I've been very busy, unfortunately. But we're doing it today. I wanted to do a clip compilation of some of my older stuff, so the gems don't get lost. Thanks for the follow, Spooky. Because there are, the older content isn't necessarily as good, but there are gems. There are gems in there. I missed my affiliate anniversary. I don't even know when my affiliate anniversary is, man. I don't even know. I didn't even remember what day my debut anniversary was. I just remembered it was in June. I just checked it before we went live. Man, even your chat's correcting you. No, but I've told you before, Brenna, that I do One Piece D&D, so I've always... One of my backup campaigns, if my current campaign ends, is to do One Piece Vikings, which is something that I really look forward to doing at some point. I did stream with zero inkling that it was my anniversary. That's how it goes. I need to adjust my camera, it's too close to my face. I need to get, that's on my list, I need to get a camera arm. Can't wait to see it or hear about it. I don't know if I'd stream it. We'll see. I'd like to. Gotta get you back at the table? I'd love to be. Yeah, I'd love to be. It was a lot of fun playing with you guys. I don't know if I don't think I'd be available for like a weekly campaign, but maybe a short campaign or a one-shot. I'm absolutely down. You guys are a lot of fun. I'd like to do more D&D content on my main channel, but the last one-shot I did and the shorts related to it have unfortunately been kind of underperforming. Our next introduction to Catacombs is Cyberpunk Red. Oh, that's interesting. I've never played with the Cyberpunk system. Cyberpunk 2077 is actually one of my favorite games. I know people dogged on it when it came out, but I loved it. It was a lot of fun. No worries, I can't fathom another full campaign. I can only handle one-shots of short campaigns. That's understandable. That's understandable. I love my home game. I love it to bits, but it's also true that for as long as for as long as my home game is going and I still need to work for a living, I'm not sure I could do a second full-time campaign, unless it was like once a month or once every 2 or 3 weeks or something. I'd like to, it'd be a dream, but ugh. It's a high barrier to entry. It's a high barrier to entry. I love DMing too, but I've had so many health scares lately that I can't make any commitments to anyone. Last few months have been nuts. You guys probably don't even know. In the last 4 months, I've moved across state lines, gotten married, I had my honeymoon, I met the Pope, and I've had to do 2 almost 7-hour car trips both ways in the last week and a half. It's been a lot. That is amazing. Thank you. We had a lot of fun. Yeah, we got to go to the papal audience and all that. It was for newlyweds. It was great. It was great. We just got her moved in last week. And I have some other news that I haven't released yet, though I'm not sure how much I will say or how much I'll be allowed to say. But yeah, so I feel bad because I can be a difficult person to get a hold of sometimes, but the last few months it's been particularly true. I've kind of been AWOL. Ugh. But yeah, we were just talking about the Digital Circus finale. I'm not going to harp on it too much. I'm working on that's another reason I like one-shots. It's less pressure on the players too. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. But I'm working on I've started working on a video essay for the Amazing Digital Circus. It's kind of like what I did with Dispatch back in January, December. That video did very well, and I enjoyed working on it. There's a part of me that kills me, because if there's a lot I could say about the Amazing Digital Circus. Especially looking at it in a vacuum versus looking at it from a meta perspective. Did you like the TADC finale? I did. There are a few caveats. But on a surface level, I did like it. I have been into the show enough that I knew from the beginning what the theme was. That the theme is about finding meaning in a meaningless world. So I knew how it was going to end. As soon as you know what the theme is, you know how it's going to end. Because of that theme, it was always going to have... and they were always going to be trapped in the circus. They were always... and it was always going to be kind of a happy ending in that they have to find a meeting among themselves. So it kind of ended almost exactly like how I expected it to. And in that sense, I was satisfied by the ending. And what I find interesting, I talked about this on X a little bit, is that if you go into the Amazing Digital Circus, what I find really fascinating about the Amazing Digital Circus is because it appeals to so many people, a lot of people have different takeaways, and the takeaways are not what the author intended. And so my kind of interest in it is that I feel like the Amazing Digital Circus reveals a lot about the author. It reveals a lot about Gooseworx and how he sees the world. Because if I were to just watch the series without knowing anything about it, I'd tell you that the main theme of the series was that things will get better in time as long as you have the courage to be your authentic self and let go of your past grudges and be vulnerable. But then when the author tells you that, no, actually, the theme is about finding meaning in a meaningless world, it's like, oh, so you think that there's no meaning to the world. And that, having that revelation in your mind colors a lot of things differently. It colors a lot of things differently, especially when, for example, they talk about Cain, the part where Cain regrets creating the circus, and how he created beings that are intelligent, and that makes them special, but also he doesn't have the authority to lord over them, and that that's fundamentally wrong. It feels like a commentary on God. That either A, there is no meaning because God isn't real, but if God is real, then he's fundamentally tyrannical. That would be what I would read into it. Because if the theme is you have to find subjective meaning when you live in a meaningless world, then the obvious presumption there is that our world is a meaningless world. That's the presumption, because otherwise that theme doesn't make sense. If the theme is finding meaning in a meaningless world, and our world does have meaning, then that theme isn't anything. There's no call to action. So baked into the theme of the Amazing Digital Circus is the presumption that the world is fundamentally meaningless. And when you look at the series through that light, it begins to look very different. And that rather than a feel-good story about found family and learning to be vulnerable and authentic with other people, it instead becomes a treatise on how God is tyrannical and unfair, about how there's really no important truth except your own truth, and that and that the only way of obtaining meaning is by living out that internalized truth, that effectively there is no truth except for the self. The self is the only real thing that exists, not anything else. And that's what I'm interested in. That's what the essay will be about. I started drafting it earlier today, and my now having actually watched it as opposed to just hearing Twitter babble about it, I have more thoughts, and the challenge is going to be able to get all those thoughts into a coherent shape. I have lots of thoughts, but they're not quite sorted yet. But we'll get there. I was personally pleased that Kane got a happy ending. I did not expect that. There's a part of me that dislikes that Kane got a happy ending, because he's an AI, and the ending kind of, there's a line earlier in the series where it's like, well, I don't want to lose track of who's a human and who's an AI, and it kind of makes it seem like the AI has character development, and by the end of it is presented as being sort of equivalent with human characters. Which again makes sense once you realize that part of the premise of the show is that there is no meaning, and if there is no meaning, then there really is no inherent difference between an AI and a human if you come at it from that perspective. Yeah, I follow TADC too. I can see the writing on the wall for the finale too. Haven't seen it yet, but I didn't care about spoilers. Well, yeah. Yeah, Yeah. I don't feel like I've spoiled anything too majorly. But it is one of those things where people who follow it more casually probably have a very different perspective than the people who have been in it. Because I wouldn't even say I'm a part of the fandom, quote-unquote, in any meaningful sense. I'm not. But I follow the news, and I like to see, and I follow what Goose has said and been involved with, so I'm familiar with all his interviews and things, but it wouldn't surprise me. Like, if you're a casual observer of the show, you may not even know that Goose is trans. I didn't. I didn't know that he was trans until I saw an interview with him, and he was still using his sort of PNG, but you could tell from the voice. And so yeah, it's like no wonder people didn't pick up on some of like the what would you say, the closeted quote-unquote themes of Jax's character. It's like, yeah, no wonder. No wonder. Because I was talking about it before you guys rated, but it's really the way it's presented. I could tell from his favorite character, Subal. Yeah. Yeah, and that's why my analysis is basically about how the Amazing Digital Circus tells on its author. You can learn a lot about Goose's past and his personality just by paying attention to his characters, and specifically Jax. Because he said in one of his interviews that Jax was like one of his inner demons, a part of himself that he was trying to get rid of. And I think that says a lot about him. I think it says a lot about him that he makes a supposedly closeted character, and then when he writes that character's backstory, he gives him a specific trauma that would lead one to transgenderism. And so it sort of undermines that premise. That, oh yeah, he's a closeted transgender person, but the reason he's transgender is because of specific trauma. Well, that kind of invalidates your whole point, doesn't it? It invalidates your whole point unless you're coming at it from the presumption that there is no such thing as truth except for your own subjective perception of the truth. Then it makes sense, because then it doesn't matter. Because if you come at it from that perspective, then it doesn't matter whether it's a mental illness or a dysphoria or a genuine identity. It doesn't matter because there is no truth to it. Once you see things like that, you can't really unsee it. But I always knew that was going to be how it was going to go, specifically because of the maid dress incident. I remember when that episode came out, and Goose was getting death threats from people because Jax was a guy, and wearing girl clothes was giving him this weird sort of, I forget the exact term they like to use, but it was giving him this weird gender dysphoric episode. It's like, how dare you do that? How dare you make him experience this gender anxiety? And those are the same people, of course, celebrating the idea that he would be transgender. But I knew that Goose shared that ideology, so from that moment on, and especially with I talked about this on X, but Jax's insistence on his own masculinity, for us it just reads as, for normal people, that reads as insecurity. But if you're coming at it from a leftist perspective, that's overcompensating. From a leftist point of view, if you're really insistent on being masculine, you're probably closeted in some way. Oh my goodness, absolute bonkers. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what really interests me about it. It's just sort of this meta-analysis. And like I said, I'm still sorting out some of my thoughts on that, but yeah, from that moment on, like, Goose wouldn't have put him in that sort of gender dysphoric scenario unless either he was closeted in some way, or if he was actually transgender. I said, at that moment, either he is a woman and has manifested as a man in this digital body, and that's why he's overcompensating, or it's the opposite. He's a man, but he's closeted in some fashion. Because you're talking about a transgender person, a transgender man, a man who identifies as a woman, writing a character whose defining character trait is the fact that he's overly insistent on his own masculinity. Once you put that all together, the rest kind of writes itself. There's only one way that can end. And then when he says that that character is a piece of himself. Because it's actually something that I can understand. I've said on stream before, I had a bit of like a very brief dysphoric episode when I was in middle school. Just because all of the men in my family are hunting, fishing, back porch, beer sipping kind of guys, and I'm not. I'm not outdoorsy. I'm not sporty. And that made me insecure about being my masculinity, and that made me... Yeah, exactly. They're all rednecks. I've lived in the Southeast my whole life. Yeah, they're all rednecks, and I'm not. And so there was a thought of like, well, if all of the men in my family are this way, and I'm not that way, am I even a man at all? And the answer, of course, was yes. And that's how I got out of that episode, is I just like, well, it doesn't matter. But that's the thing, is that if I were if I were a few years younger than I am and the transgender craze happened, that dysphoria probably wouldn't have gone away. It probably would have deepened. And so when I hear, like, the scenario that's presented with Jax, I identify with it. I'm like, oh, yeah, you feel insecure in your masculinity. You feel like you're being punished for being a man. You feel like you're not living up to the standards of masculinity that other people have for you. Yeah. It could have destroyed your life. Yeah, it could have. It could have. Absolutely. It absolutely could have. And that's why I try not to be very shy about saying that, even though it's, on the surface, it's pretty embarrassing. I think there are a lot of people who, if they heard that, would think I was an egg that needed to be cracked. But, I had those, especially because my parents used to tell me stories about how, before I was born, they thought I was going to be a girl. And they only found out very late into the pregnancy that I was a boy. And so I had those thoughts, like, maybe if I would, especially because I had no friends at the time, I was bullied, I was very lonely, and I felt disconnected with my father. I had those thoughts of, like, well, maybe if I was a girl, I would be happier. I had those thoughts. But what got me out of it was, yeah, well, even if that's true, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you would be happier as a girl because you're not a girl. And you can't become a girl. So therefore, your only moral option is to do the most with what you have. You're a stronger man than most being able to talk about that. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. It's not something I like talking about. But I had that realization, because at the time I was agnostic. At the time I was having, I was seriously depressed. I was very depressed. I was having extreme existential episodes. I was having existential panic attacks over the issue of whether God existed. But eventually I reached the conclusion that, well, if God exists, then he made me a man for a reason, and therefore I have a duty to fulfill the purpose of that manhood. Regardless of whether I like it or not, I have that duty. Even if God doesn't exist, then there is no inherent meaning to be, then there is no such thing as manhood or womanhood, masculinity or femininity. It's all just biologics and electrochemicals. And if there's nothing but biologics and electrochemicals, my biologics and electrochemicals are male. So therefore, that's what I am, and I have a duty to fulfill that role. That sexually dimorphic role. Basically, if God exists, then there is such a thing as a self, but it's not possible for the self to be at disconnection with the body because God is perfect and everything he creates is as he intends to create it. If God doesn't exist, then there is no such thing as the self. Therefore, it's not possible for myself to be at odds with my body because there is nothing but my body. There is no self apart from the body. Therefore, myself and my body cannot really be at odds. But transgenderism is really unique. It's really contradictory in that it tries to maintain the existence of a self while denying anything except for biological reality. Which you can't have that. If there's nothing but atoms and electrochemicals, then that means that your self is nothing but atoms and electrochemicals, and those atoms and electrochemicals are male. So therefore you can't be a woman on the inside because there's only biology, and your biology is a male biology. But that's why you have to begin with that presumption of there's no truth. There is no such thing as truth. There is no meaning to reality. It's all random, and even if there is a truth, it doesn't really matter. Interesting, thank you. So if you're going to maintain that ideology of transgenderism, because you can't have God and transgenderism, God creates everything perfectly, so you either have to believe that there is a God, but that God is either malevolent or incompetent, such that he created a self that is inconsistent with your body, or that there is no God and it's just body, but because it's just body, your body is nothing, it's dust, and you can do whatever you want to it. and the only true thing is your subjective perception, what we call the stream of consciousness that we call the self. It doesn't hold up to reason, but that's kind of the point. It's why Cain, that's the whole point of Cain in The Amazing Digital Circus. The theme of Cain's character is that he's God, and he's either incompetent, which he shows incompetence, or he's evil and corrupt, which he shows evil and corruption. That only an evil and corrupt God could create a world as chaotic and meaningless as ours. Which is why at the end of The Amazing Digital Circus, Cain steps down from his throne. He ceases to be God, basically. Because he says that it's immoral for him to lord his divine power over intelligent beings. So that's what the essay is about. That's what the essay is about. Really trying to unpack that, and not just analyzing the series, but specifically using the series as a means of analyzing the author. Because I think that's one of the few advantages we have in a modern society, is that everything is so documented that we have all these records, we have all access to it, we have this constant stream of information that we call social media, and so we know what the author has to say or think about every little of these creative decisions. And also, the other reason I think I want to do that, because I've said this on X before, is I have a certain fondness for Gooseworx. I said this at the start of stream, but as a creative person, I like Gooseworx, and I think he has a lot of talent. But also, I had this revelation. I was talking on X with an account, Huela, I think is how you pronounce her name. Talking about how it's funny that I forget I can actually find it, but the idea was that Jax is interesting as a character because he's supposed to be an author self-insert, but also a lot of disaffected young Gen Z men really identify with Jax as a character, and I said, well, that's because Goose is a disaffected Gen Z man. That if you're a Gen Z guy, you were raised in a culture that really kind of blatantly hated you for being a man, and really tried to do everything in its power to keep you from manifesting masculinity. And when you fall into that, you really only have two options. Your two options are to either reject society, which is what, if you're on the online right, that's what you've chosen to do. That's what you've chosen to do. You've chosen to reject the society that rejects you. Or you can reject your masculinity. That part of the reason we have so many men trying to become women is because they've been told their whole lives that being a man is a bad thing. And that's one of the things that I think is really revealing about Jax's character, is that that's how he's raised. He's raised in an environment where he's punished for being a man. And so of course it's only natural that he would manifest a desire to be something other than a man. And I don't know whether Goose is blind to that, or whether it's a case of the author being a bit too honest for his own good, and accidentally revealing something about himself that he didn't mean to. I've heard it said before that being an author is like baring your bare butt to the world. It's inherently vulnerable. Well, that's sort of a crass way of expressing it. You're very vulnerable. And there are plenty of funny stories about authors revealing certain biases that they didn't even realize they had. For example, a funny story I heard from the Twitter grapevine was someone talking about a safety catch on revolvers. when revolvers didn't have safety catches. Certain revolvers did, but most didn't. Only Italian-made revolvers had safety catches, and so he was revealing something about his upbringing without realizing it. That he had this sort of unique upbringing, but he didn't realize that upbringing was unique, and so he generalized it, and then no one else could relate to it. Or, I don't remember the name of the show, but little things like that. Where you try to, it's almost like you go out to someone and you try to relate to them, like, isn't that so true? And everyone just looks at you like you're crazy. Like, no. It's not. Are you okay? And so I think in that sense I sympathize with the man. I've had that happen, lol. I think we all have. We tell a story from our childhood that we think other people will relate to, and they just can't, and we realize it's an entirely unique experience. Because that's something you don't realize as a kid. Especially as a kid, is realizing that different people think differently. And have different lived experiences than you do. And so I think Goose kind of told on himself a few times with this character. And I'm interested in talking about that. Because Goose is like me and like probably most of my viewers in the sense that he is a disaffected Gen Z male who is frustrated by the fact that masculinity has been punished and discouraged at every turn. His reaction to that was to curse his own masculinity, and I think my initial reaction to that is he won't ever see the stuff that I make, I don't think, but I wish I could pull him out of that hole. He's probably too far gone, but I hope that his negative experiences with the Rainbow crowd and having them issue him and others death threats over completely trivial things I would hope that would help him steer him away, realizing that the people he's chosen to associate with are universally toxic assholes. Because I think most people's reaction to Jax would be that the guy's just a drama queen. Like, I like Jax as a character, but also he's a drama queen. And every bad thing that happened to him could have been avoided if he just grew a spine. And I think most people have that reaction. It's like the meme of when your friend is telling you a story and you realize that the person they're talking about isn't the problem, isn't the problem in the story, isn't actually the villain of the narrative. That's how I feel like with Jax. Even he is presented as the antagonist, so there's some self-awareness there, but it's like, dude. Dude, if you think that these feelings are in any way, I don't want to say they're unreasonable, but if you think that these are valid reactions, they're not. I don't think he does believe that, but the man has Jax has issues. He deals with his issues in an unhealthy way, and the show is very obvious about that. But it makes me wonder, like, Goose, how are you dealing with your issues? Because there's nothing in the show that I think really shows... How do I phrase this? The characters have trauma, but it doesn't present a way out of that trauma except for just talking about it, which is clearly insufficient. You know, it helps in certain cases. And obviously, you know, you reach out to your friends and you have those connections and those strengthen you. That's true. That's true. That's obviously true. But you're not actually processing the trauma. You're just bolstering yourself against the trauma. Those are two different things. You know, if everyone, you know, if you have people using their hands to cover up the hole in the sinking boat, you've stopped the sinking, but you haven't actually patched the hole, if that makes sense as an analogy. Because my gut reaction from just watching the finale is that Goose doesn't have a healthy way of dealing with his trauma, and his way of dealing with his trauma is ignoring it. And just pretending like everything is okay, because there's no such thing as truth, and so therefore if he pretends that things are okay, then they're okay. Which is just the same thing that Jax is doing. Which I think is why the finale could be seen as shallow by some people. Because if a right-winger were to write The Amazing Digital Circus, well, actually, I can tell you how it would end if I were writing it, because I wrote a very similar story. Holy cow, how have I not made this connection? Yeah, I wrote almost the exact same story. Why am I just having this realization? I wrote a short story. It's published. I have a collection. It's in all my links everywhere. The Shepherd and the Sheepdog and Other Short Stories. There's a story in that called The Abolition of Lourdes, which presents a very similar scenario about brain-scanned people being put into a digital realm and not liking it. And the solution, as a right-winger who believes in objective truth, the happy ending, quote-unquote, of that story is that the server gets unplugged and erased. Because brain scans aren't people. Obviously. I wrote that story. How have I never made this connection? I know why I've never made this connection. It's because I don't think about myself. It's because I don't think about myself at all. I don't think about the things I've written. I write them so I don't think about them anymore. I put them on paper so they're not in my head, and then I don't think about them again. Yeah, holy cow, I wrote that story. I don't need to write the conservative Amazing Digital Circus, I already have. That's crazy for me to think about, actually. But yeah, if you believed in objective truth, then the circus is a hell scenario. If you believe in objective truth, then the circus is a hell scenario, and the happy ending to the scenario is for it to end. The happy ending scenario is for the characters to work together to shut down the system so that no one ever has to go through what they go through again. It's only if you're a liberal where the happy ending is them living in the circus forever as a found family. Because that's obviously hell. That's obviously hell. It might sound fine on the surface, but imagine, it's no different than if you were to lock the door to your room and it was just you and the computer, and that's it. Because that's basically all they are, is they have admin controls, so they can manifest whatever they want. They have admin controls, so they can manifest whatever they want, but they can't actually do anything meaningful. This is actually something that I've been reflecting on lately as a creative person. Is that I used to be satisfied with the idea of creating for creation's sake, but as I've gotten older, I've become increasingly dissatisfied with that. Actually, no. If I write something and no one ever reads it, then there is no point to me writing it, not really. It might have been useful for me in my personal development, but that's it. It doesn't mean you have to make it. It doesn't mean you have to change the world, but a story is only valuable In my mind, something is only valuable if it can help someone else. Even if that someone is yourself, it has to help someone. And so they are locked in this nightmare scenario where none of their actions have any consequences whatsoever. And so it's no different than if you just had a computer. Like, imagine you were just playing Gary's mod for the rest of eternity. That's not, that's hell. They're very similar. Don't mind if I get a big audience for something I've written, but whatever written should teach something. Yeah, I'm glad you feel the same. And so they're in this scenario where they can never grow. They can never really grow for other people. There are no people. They themselves are not people, and so there's no actual solution. It's just aimless. It's meaningless. And so the ending is only a happy ending if you don't believe that there is meaning to the world. But if you do believe that there's meaning to the world, then the happy ending for the Amazing Digital Circus is for someone to find the server that it's stored on and beat it with a baseball bat. Because you just created the torment nexus to reference a certain meme. You've just created the torment nexus. You're just tormenting AI for no reason at that point. Sure, they might have some. If you look at them as characters, they might have some good times for a while, but eventually they're all going to abstract. It's inevitable. They're going to get bored, they're going to realize that they're not doing anything meaningful, and they're going to abstract, and that'll be the end. And since they never found a solution to abstraction, yeah, that's it. That's it, and there's a horror to that. But, there's a horror to that, but only if you work with the presumption that there's meaning. I need to sip. Do you know about the proclivity that Goose has regarding lobotomies? People have been making connections between that and the abstractions becoming basically pets. No, I have not heard about that. Judging by the way you phrased that, that might be something you have to DM to me, because that's not something I've heard about myself. He is fond of them in a certain way. You know, I wish I was surprised, but that is what you get with that crowd 90% of the time, is just weird things like that. Just really weird things like that. Yeah, I have a lot to think about as far as all that goes. But I think, and this might be the end cap, because I mentioned this in my current draft of the video essay. I begin with this, but one of the things I find I'm really fascinated with when it comes to the Amazing Digital Circus is how it became a cultural touchstone. Everyone knows about it, everyone talks about it, everyone likes it, even people like me, people who are on the right who shouldn't like it because it has a lot of millennial writing tropes. It appeals to everyone, and I think it's because it deals with that sense of of meaninglessness. And so in that sense, as a piece of art, I think I will always be fond of The Amazing Digital Circus, because it's pretty objectively well written, aside from the millennial writing tropes. It's written by people who have a very different ideology and very different perspective on things than I do. But the characters are fun, the story and plot is engaging, and even though the intended theme of the story is not something that I align with, there are themes and messages that one can derive from the series that I think are useful. Other than, you know, the gay stuff. And I hope that Gooseworx goes on to do great things. But at the risk of sounding cruel, my expectations are low. I think he's probably married himself to this ideology, and I'm not sure he's going to come back from it. Because the only benefit of the circus is that it gives you a radical liberty. It's a world where you can do wherever you want. And it seems like that's the way that Goose has chosen to live his life. He's chosen to live his life as if the only thing that matters is his own ability to do whatever he pleases. And that level, that's a very seductive ideology. It's a very seductive ideology, and it's very difficult to divorce yourself from it, not in the least because it involves admitting that you were wrong. Which, ironically, is the same mistake that Jax makes, so it'll be interesting. Well, us praying for him can never hurt. Very true. Very true. As I said, I have a certain fondness for the man, as strange as that fondness is, so praying for him is definitely a good idea. He's a man with a lot of talent. That much is absolutely certain. That much is absolutely certain. He has a lot of talent. And for what it's worth, I was talking earlier about, you know, doing good in the world. I like to think that The Amazing Digital Circus, despite its flaws and the sort of liberalism at its core, leftism I should say, I think it does more good for people than not. Because unless you are paying attention to the meta-narrative and you know that the theme of the story is that the world is meaningless, if you didn't know that, then you would just walk away with the theme of it's okay to be vulnerable. And you should let go of the past if you want to have a good future, which I think is a good message. And especially with Jax being kind of a commentary on the sardonic irony that a lot of millennials specifically carry with them. And that, hey, you actually don't need to be ironic all the time. I think that's a good message for the modern day. And so I think he's done good work. I just hope he works on himself. As we all should. But him specifically. Yeah. Some people's problems are more obvious than others. Respectfully. But we can move on. We can move on from that topic.